You can't delegate chaos. So today we're talking about a simple 3-step SOP that makes people actually execute to your standards. The reason even good entrepreneurs get stuck putting out fires all day long is because they really can't figure out how to get their team to replicate what they do. So SOPs might sound like the most boring thing ever, and I get it, but they're one of the fastest and easy ways to get time off your calendar every single week. So in this video, I'm going to show you a simple 3-step SOP that you can install this week that's going to get at least one task you absolutely hate doing done without you having to touch it and still being able to see the performance. By the way, I'm Brent, and I own a B2B commercial real estate services company that does just under $2 million a year and takes me about 90 minutes a week to run. The rest of the time, I help 7-figure founders get 10 hours a week back within 24 weeks. So let's talk about this simple 3-step SOP that I personally used to get tasks that I absolutely hated off of my plate for good. So the first thing to do here is pick one task you never want to do again, but that happens at least once a month. Once you have that task, then you record yourself doing it. So you can use a Loom video or something like that to record yourself doing the whole thing from start to finish as if you're doing it right then. So the key here is to talk through what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what your criteria are for the task being, quote, done. Now, it's going to help you to think about this kind of like you're explaining it in a way that has so much detail that someone could understand it even if they were just listening to the video of you doing the task and just getting the audio of that, right? So once you have that, then you got to put together just the one-page SOP, and that's clearly going to state the purpose of the task, what the outcome is that it's creating. That's the purpose. The trigger for the task, right? When does it happen? And then the steps someone would need to follow to complete the task, like a bullet checklist in order of what happens for each step. And the last thing on that one-page SOP is writing out what the definition of success for the task actually is. So in other words, how are you going to measure this thing that you're handing off, right? Once you've got one page of the SOP, now you've just got to choose the right person to hand it off to. So when I was doing that, I had 2 criteria that I like to look for in the person that I'm choosing. The first is, do they have the capacity to do what I want them to do? So can they take this one thing without breaking? And you want to do that to make sure that, because if you overload them and they quit, then you've got a backfire, and that totally sucks. So the second criteria in choosing the person is, do they already have the skill, or can they be trained in less than 2 weeks to do the thing I need them to do? What you're looking for here is really the person that gives you the shortest possible timeline to creating this full handoff. So that's step 1. And now that you've got your core SOP and the person you're going to hand it off to, right? Cool. Okay. Next thing is that we need to get that person to actually execute what's in the SOP. And that's where all the magic happens. And here's how I pulled that off. So the first thing is I had a kickoff meeting, and I intentionally limited it to 25 minutes. And there's no real magic in that number. I just found that when we tighten timelines, it really tightens everyone's focus. So the same thing gets done just in a compressed amount of time. Anyway, in the kickoff meeting, you're reviewing the one-page SOP and the video you recorded of yourself doing the task. And all that's just the task that you're handing off. Stick to one task in this. You're also going to explain why that task matters and what perfect looks like and what else in the system breaks if this task is done wrong. Then what I did was run 3 reps of the task together with the person I was handing it off to. So the first one was me doing it and really strictly following the SOP and them watching me do it. Then the second rep was them doing it while I watched and corrected for any gaps. So I used that second rep to update my SOP, because one of the things I realized was that anything I had to correct while somebody else was doing it was because the SOP wasn't clear in the first place. So in an ideal scenario, you're going to have an SOP and a documentation video that you could hand off pretty much to anyone, and they'd be able to execute it perfectly. So that's 2 reps. The third was them doing it on their own and me spot checking what they did. So what you're looking for here is an airtight case that proves that they can do the task the way that you want it done. Cool? Okay, Last thing I did in those meetings was clarify what power they had over the task. So things like what they can decide alone versus when they needed to escalate something up to me. I wanted to give them enough power to be able to do it without going too far over the guardrails to where we could have a real problem. Okay, we're going to jump into the last step. But before I do that, I want to encourage what I bet is half of you who feel like you're so underwater right now that even doing what I'm talking about in this video is going to push you over the edge to like full-blown burnout mode. So my encouragement is just to dig in and hang in there for yourself. Making SOPs like we're talking about here today might seem like an extra hour or two this week, but they're going to give you back hours every week going forward. So look at it in terms of leverage. You create it once and then it works forever. Cool? Okay, let's get into the last step of this 3-step SOP. That's going to get you a task off of your calendar that you absolutely hate. And we're going to do it in a way where you can still see the performance. So the first thing I did for step 3 is a formal handoff, which was just updating the org chart with the name of the person who is now responsible for the task, and then removing myself from the things that triggered the task. So stuff like emails and standing calendar events. You want to make absolutely sure that you aren't involved in whatever triggers the old task that you were doing, because you're going to want to jump in and handle it by default, right? Ask me how I know. But once I did the formal handoff, then I had to put a system in place that let me keep an eye on the performance. That came with a set of simple KPIs. I had 3 metrics for the task, right? Turnaround time, error rate, and volume. That's it. You want to keep this tight because it tightens your focus about what really matters, so the person you handed it off to can tighten their focus to make sure they're doing the things that really matter. So once I had the KPIs, then I just had to set a cadence of reporting. So I just got a weekly screenshot emailed to me showing the 3 metrics that I wanted to see that I set up in the KPIs. Now, at this point, I'm sure you might think this is completely handed off, but I wanted to make sure it didn't accidentally boomerang the thing and have it come back to me at some point in the future. So I kept the guardrails super tight at the beginning with a 10-minute standing meeting every week for the first 3 weeks. And I say standing because we were actually standing up during those meetings, which, pro tip, that is the best way to make sure a 10-minute meeting doesn't turn into a 30-minute one. So in that meeting, all I was looking for was what was done, how did it perform, and what was the measurement against the target KPI. We'd also look for any obstacles that could have been overcome without me if they had more decision-making authority. So they'd get more authority the longer they did the task because now they're grooved in. So once we got past that initial 3-week window, I really slowed down the cadence to once a month, as long as all the performance metrics were still being hit. And if for some reason they weren't, then I just jump back to step 2 that I talked about a little earlier in this video and get the people more trained. Because the way I figured it is that if I told them once and they didn't do it, then it was my fault because I didn't clearly explain what needed to be done. If I told them twice and they didn't do it, then it was my fault because I didn't do a good job of explaining why it needed to be done. And if I told them 3 times and they still didn't do it, it could finally be their fault because they didn't care enough to listen during the first 2 times that I said it. All right, soapbox off. All right, so let's put this all with a nice little bow so you can just go out and execute it on your own. So first thing I did was I defined and documented the task. That was the thing I was totally avoiding the most because I thought it would take forever. I didn't have time for it. That's why I started recording those short Loom videos of me doing the task, and it dropped my time down to nothing. So second thing is I demonstrated the task to the person that I was handing it off to, and then did dry runs to make sure that the work I'd done to create the SOP was clear enough for other people to follow. So I put in a simple reporting system last with 3 metrics that mattered and a system to have all the data delivered directly to me. I didn't want to have to go out there and get it. So that's really all I did. And I get it. Making SOPs is super boring. But at least what I've found is that it's the boring stuff that took me from working 60+ hour weeks, always on the edge of burnout, to 90 minutes a week without losing any profit or control in that company. So I want you to keep in mind, I did this without a massive company. We just did $2 million in revenue with 11 employees. And it's not like we have really high paying clients either, right? Our average client is $1,800 a month. So whatever reasons you have for thinking that maybe this isn't the right thing for you, realize that a lot of things you may think you need, you actually don't. All this is this simple execution of simple things that actually matter. So speaking of that, if you want to clear up time on your calendar this week for things that actually matter, I've got a tool that'll help you get 3 hours back this week. In the long term, I help take 7-figure founders and get 10 to 12 hours off of their week in 24 weeks without losing profit or control. But the first step to that is a free 48-hour founder time reset where you use my founder time dividend system to pull 3 hours off your calendar this week. You get the dashboard, you get the scripts, and a 15-minute call with me where we literally remove 1 to 3 hours live right there in the call. So if you think that's something that would help you, just hit the link in the description and get started today for free. Okay, cool. Thanks for watching on this video. I'll see you on the next one.